Kathy, you want to introduce our speaker? Let me get on this.
It's so good to see all the people here tonight. So somebody told me earlier, if you want to have a crowd, just invite the Fisher family. So it's good to see all of you. I have my phone set up. We're going to be recording tonight, and then I'll post it to YouTube, and I'll try to do that tonight. So if you'll check later, just go on and search for Bemis Historical Society or for Ralph Fisher, and hopefully you'll find it. We're trying to put all the videos, all of our meetings up there. Also, if you look at bemishistory.org, there's a page that's monthly meetings and videos, so I'll usually post the link there. And of course, we have a Facebook page, the Bemis Museum, and we have 2 or 3 Facebook groups about Bemis that you might want to join. And I'm sure all of you already know Ralph, so there's probably not anything that I know that I can tell you that you don't already know. I just know that he's the son of George and Jolena Fisher. My uncle Billy Joe Haney was good friends with George. My parents always talked about the Fisher boys. The Fisher boys were such good athletes and very well known. And so we're glad to have the following generation to come and talk to us today.
Good evening. I'm hoping that I can keep from knocking this laptop off here. There's not much of a ledge, so hopefully it's going to stay up here. I'm just going to jump right in here. I've got a story to tell tonight, and usually I speak off the cuff, but tonight I'm going to have to stick to my notes pretty close, because I do have somewhere I'm going here with this story. So I could get off topic really easy. Some time ago, it was a quiet place. A small creek trickled northward on its unknown journey. The land was flat and the cotton grew tall in the long hot summers. When the time was right, a company was born. It thrived and prospered in cotton textiles along the creek in only a few short years. The quiet place became known as, named after the company, became known as Bemis, Tennessee. So in 1996, I pieced together a story. It was a short story. It contained a few paragraphs on one page. It included some facts on my grandmother, Acenah Mills Fisher. In my opinion, this story was a turning point for her. It was also a turning point for our entire family. I printed it and I framed it. And I hung it on her wall. A 15 youngster in Bemis until she passed away in October of 2000. I can still remember her saying, "I didn't tell you that." Currently, it's hung in my heart for over 25 years. I'd like to share this story with you tonight. Because I'm somewhat expanding this story from my original printed story, the title of my story tonight is called The Journey to Bemis, The Fishers of 15 Young Street. The emphasis tonight is on journey. All of us have heard it. Life is a journey. And we all know every person has a different experience. Life's journey is filled with roadblocks and achievements. But to survive, we must embrace every turn. Lean into it, somebody once said. My story tonight is about love. It's a story of the love of family. It's a story that any one of you could tell about your own family. It's a story that we should tell our loved ones over and over. Tricia, stop it. It's a story of the imaginary glue, which we know deep down it's not imaginary at all. The glue that holds us and binds us all indefinitely to our family. Outside of God Almighty, family is everything. My name is Ralph Fisher. George Ralph Fisher Jr. Just a little elaboration here. I was born in Jackson, Madison County General in 1962. We lived at, I think, 25 Young Street, about 4 doors down from my grandmother. When my dad and my mother first got married. We lived there for about 18 months, so I do qualify as somebody originally from Bemis. We moved out to Old Pinson Road when I was 18 months old. I have a brother and a sister, Jeff and Lisa, and a brother-in-law. Married in 1988, wife Deborah Trim of South Haven, Mississippi. Got 2 grown boys. My oldest was 29, lives outside of Atlanta. He's married to a beautiful young lady from Collierville, Kelly Jones. I have a young son, 22, still at home. Many of you here tonight and watching the delayed video online knew my father, George R. Fisher Sr. He was born in 1933, the 8th child of 13 of Benton and Acenah Mills Fisher. He was born in the house, 15 Young Street. He spent his entire childhood at this location. He was a founding member of the Bemis Historical Society. He took great pride in what? Chairman. He took great pride in honoring this special place of his youth and his adulthood. He was a great father, and he's greatly missed in our family. I could go in great details about my father, but tonight, my father's not the focal. George was a big brother to several here tonight. David, Kenny, anybody else sneak in on me? Glad to have y'all here. Side note, George was also a big brother to Richard Tootie Dick Fisher, another beloved member of the Historic Society. Ronald, I understand, had great pride here, was a big influence on the grant that came here. He got it. But anyway, I bring up Uncle Richard because that was the recent husband of Aunt Judy. And shout out to those for her connecting the dots to get me here tonight with Kathy. Thank you for the opportunity, and what an honor. My mother was Jolena Pearl Fisher. I'll get to that later. Okay. She was born in 1938, the oldest of 2 daughters of Orrin and Mary Emma Watkins Pearl. My grandfather, mother's father, Orrin Pearl, had 4 siblings that all worked for the Bemis Mill. Most of their life, many of them breaking the 50-year mark at the Bemis Company. Orrin Pearl was part of the greatest generation and was drafted in 1944 at the age of 26 and served in World War II in the Pacific Front. He got off the boat shortly after the Americans and the Allied forces took control of the Iwo Jima. His loom lives here in the back. Not only do I possess several pieces of his work off of this loom, but personally witnessed him working the loom and his love for his craft. My grandmother, Mary Emma Watkins Pearl, went to beauty school, did hair for many women in the Bemis and the Jackson area. Now, I could very easily speak on my wonderful mother and her family, but again, I'm not focused on her. I understand this beautiful building here we're in tonight is in the process of celebrating its 100th anniversary. Everybody here know that? This year, 100 years. Wow. I'm not certain of the exact dates, but my granddaddy, Benton, set up there in the projection room. Ran the equipment for many years. Shout out to him. Special thanks for his technical expertise of the time. And I can't tell you the surreal feeling here. It's emotional. Since the topic tonight is journey to Bemis, before we actually get to the Fishers of 15 Young Street, I'd like to back up just one generation prior to the marriage of my grandparents, William Benton Fisher and Acenah Mills, and discuss their parents, so my great-grandparents. So ladies first, let's begin with my grandmother, Acenah's father. Acenah was also known as Acenah. His name would be George Wesley Mills. He was born in 1851 in Pennsylvania County in Virginia. Now, not Pennsylvania, it's Pennsylvania, Pitts. Now, most of this area wouldn't recognize this county, but it's home to Danville, Virginia. In 1851, Bemis didn't exist in West Tennessee. It was a world away from the Mills family. Also, to add a little more meat to the story, George Wesley Mills' father was George Washington Mills, also from Virginia. I have to add that in 1900, George was the fourth most common name. I think we understand why. The reason I added this fact is not only was my father George, but also myself a George, Ralph Jr., and my firstborn son is George III, goes by True. So George goes way back in my family. So it's not really understood how or why, but through FamilySearch.org, our great-grandfather, George Wesley Mills, and his parents and siblings ended up in Carroll County, Tennessee between 1860 and 1870. My first question would be, why? If I could go back and ask somebody, okay, she's going to answer here. All right.
George Washington Mills was hired to come to West Tennessee as an overseer. I hate that word, but it's a fact. For the plantation of the Methodist minister John Jefferson Burr, who had over 100 slaves.
That would have been Aunt Nell's husband.
Yes.
Okay. Our father. Oh, okay. Thank you, Judge.
But they took a side trip to Cave City, Arkansas, where some of the younger children were born, and then they came back to Tennessee to, what was that place Bill would always take us, Sadie Lou's. They settled at Sadie Lou's, okay? And they also, their kids were enrolled in the Spring Creek College when he was working on the John Jefferson Burr plantation.
All right. Well, that answers a lot of questions. You need to get her to speak next time. So, what do we know? In 1865, Danville, Virginia became the third capital of the Confederate States for 8 days, from April 3rd to April 10th in 1865, after Richmond fell and before the end of the terrible Civil War for these great United States. I'm going to guess and say, in general, war is hell, and normal folks were looking for a life where they could live, work, thrive, and I add survive. So the details here are most likely a lot more than what I knew. But I'm grateful for the move of this family to West Tennessee. It's a key point in our family history that impacted us and generations to come. On December 14th, 1861, 151 years ago, my great-grandfather, George Wesley Mills, about 20 years old, married a young woman named Cornelia J. Adams, who was about 17 or 18, in Carroll County. They had 3 children. There's only one problem here. Cornelia was not my great-grandmother. And Acenah Mills was not one of these 3 children. So George and his first wife, Cornelia, journey began here in West Tennessee. And by the time they had reached their 3rd year of marriage, they had 2 daughters, Emily and Jenny. Life was good, maybe. I don't really know. But what I do know is Tennessee wasn't providing the expectations of a future for young George. Something about Texas drew them away from Tennessee. Something drew them west. They ended up in Limestone County, 30 miles east of Waco, Texas, in the mid-1870s. At that time, the city of Groesbeck had just become the county seat of Limestone County in 1873. What took them there? I'd like to say I knew, but let's extrapolate a little more. Why did people migrate west? Well, a few decades earlier, what we know is despite hardships and dangers, immigrants from Germany, France, Ireland, Poland, Czechoslovakia, countries throughout the world followed the siren call to the frontier of Texas. The population in Texas in 1920 was a mere 20,000, but by 1875 there was about 1.5 million. This mass move became known as GTT. Anybody know what that means? Gone to Texas. Kind of makes me want to go right now.
Where they could not locate descendants of someone that was camped on.
Gone to Texas. So just imagine now, George about 25 and Cornelia barely 20. The two very young toddlers arriving in Limestone County, Texas in the mid-1870s. George and Cornelia's 3rd child, Charlie, would have been born in Limestone County in 1879, and during their 8th year of marriage. So they've been married 8 years, they're on their 3rd child. So I can only guess with the size and the depth of young married couples, how they had children during this time. They might have had some difficulties conceiving children. We don't know this. We may never know. 5 more years go by, and for whatever reason, God didn't bless them with any more than 3 children. Time continued to pass for the family, and they continued to grow roots in Limestone County, Texas. By 1884, the young family was in their 13th year of marriage. Fate of this young pioneer couple was now approaching an unknown turning point. A turning point that would change the whole dynamic of life for George Wesley. Jenny, their 2nd child, came inside from playing one day in 1884 and told her parents, "I saw an angel in a whirlwind." I think the story is that she lost her bonnet also. But she said, "I saw an angel in a whirlwind, and they told me I was going to heaven very soon." And it was shortly after this that this vibrant young 8-9-year-old carefree Jenny died in Limestone County in 1884. It was shortly after this that her mother, Cornelia, died that same year. what was George, the 33, to do? Here on the vastness of the Texas frontier, he had just become widowed, and his two surviving children, Emily, 11, and Charlie, 5, had no mother. This story is not a fairy tale. It's not some science fiction novel. It happened. And it's been handed down from my great-grandparents to my grandmother, Acenah. And the story's been retold many times. Although stories like this exist in all families, many are long forgotten. But this one lives on. I believe family has a mysterious way of filling the gaps. Actually, I believe God has this mysterious way of filling the gaps. You see, Cornelia's mother, her name was Sarah. She was not a stranger to family loss. And Cornelia's father, another George Adams, passed away when Cornelia was only about 2, so too young to remember. And Cornelia's mother, Sarah, remarried and had several more children. Cornelia's half-sister, Alice Ferguson, a young school teacher back in Virginia. Now, I heard my grandmother tell this tale just on the drive up, so I'm going to have to edit here. She said her mother came from Virginia to Maryland to see the kids. She got married to George. Let me pause there just for a second. I want to thank God for my great-grandmother, Alice. Is that not amazing? Interesting enough, George had moved from Limestone County, Texas, back to West Tennessee, and he and Alice were married the same year in 1884 in Gibson County. Over the next 20 years, they had 8 children. And now listen to this list. Mary, 9, now Paul Denton, which was PD, Uncle PD, Ruth, Hattie, Acenah, and Kara. Did you count how many boys there was in that? 1. Acenah, my grandmother, was born about 1900. There's another whole story in that. We're not going to go into that. But about 1903, George Wesley and Alice Ferguson Mills and 8 children moved from Milan to the newly established Bemis, Tennessee to seek employment with the mill. Considering my great-grandparents, the Mills, moved to Bemis in 1903, I personally consider them founding members, 1903, of the community. While we let the Mills simmer here in Bemis about the turn of the century, let's turn to my grandfather Benton's family. So my great-grandfather, Benton's father, was Thomas Monroe Fisher. He was born in 1865 in Middle Tennessee in Marshall County, just north of Lewisburg, Tennessee. This is about 40 miles south of Nashville. You see, his well-documented great-grandfather, Frederick Fisher, was a Revolutionary War veteran. Now, Thomas would not have known his great-grandfather, Frederick, but Thomas's dad, William Porter, would have known him very well. He was wounded in the Battle of Kings Mountain in October of 1780 on the border of North Carolina and South Carolina. It's a known fact that this battle, the Revolutionary War, was a turning point in the American Revolution. After the Revolutionary War, Frederick and his wife married. She was a Wynn, I believe it's L-Y-N-N-E, from a very prominent family. Migrated west from Mecklenburg County region of North Carolina to one of the most beautiful spots on God's green earth, the hills of Middle Tennessee. Frederick had taken advantage of a government land grant for Revolutionary War veterans in the early 1800s. For a couple of generations, the Fishers stayed close to the old home place in a community. It's spelled like Berlin, but it's pronounced Berlin in Marshall County. But through family history, it's somewhat understood that Thomas Fisher and his parents were headed west on their quest for life and found himself in West Tennessee's Carroll County area. Some say something happened on the westward coal movement and the family was halted on this journey. On February 28th of 1889, Thomas Monroe Fisher, my great-grandfather, about 24 years old, married Mary Minerva Merritt, about 20 years old, in Carroll County. They wasted no time in starting their family because later that same year, their first child was born. Her name was Matilda Tilly, they called her Tilly Fisher. Unfortunately, fate was not good for the young couple. They only had one child. There's only one more small problem. Mary Minerva Merritt was not my great-grandmother. And Tildy was definitely not my grandfather. So records are not conclusive, but it's almost certain that Mary Minerva Merritt Fisher died at 21 years of age, giving birth to Tildy in the winter of 1889. Mary and my great-grandfather Thomas had been married less than a year. Thomas, 24, became a widow and a father at the same moment. So several years went by for Thomas and Tildy. But on December 6, 1897, Thomas remarried Frances Ellen Roark in Carroll County. Thomas would have been 32 and Frances would have been 19. My grandfather, William Benton Elijah Fisher, was born the following year in 1898. He was the first of 7 children of Frances and Thomas. Claude was born in 1900. Connie was born in 1902, both in Carroll County. And at this point, I'd like to say that getting the Fishers 40 miles down the road to Bemis was easy. But if I did, I'd be lying. What happened over the next 10 to 11 years was nothing short of a miracle for the Fishers to end up in this place. In late 1903, my great-grandfather Thomas Monroe Fisher and Frances Roark Fisher and 3 very small children set off by train out of Mila to meet the Roarks, which would have been Frances's family in East Texas. What'd they do? They had that GTT going, didn't they? The Roarks had all migrated to Texas a year earlier. There's another whole story in that, but I don't have time for it. Their 4th child, Bert, was born in Texas in 1904. Sometime shortly after moving to Texas, they took a train up to Choctaw Indian Nation, now present-day Boswell, Oklahoma, is where they got off the train. From here, they traveled by wagon west to a place for work at a ranch called the Harold Ranch outside of Davis, Oklahoma. And their daughter, Beatrice, was born in Indian Territory in 1907. The family showed residence in 1910. This is after Oklahoma became a state. They came to state in late 1907 or 1908. But the family showed residence in 1910 in Oklahoma and a census in the Davis Ward 1 in Murray County, Oklahoma. Chester was born here in 1910. Life must have been good here in Oklahoma, but for whatever reason, they left for western Arkansas and Yell County. You know, every time I say Yell County, I can't help but think of True Grit. You know, that's the picture I have. Some say my great-grandfather Thomas was a restless man. From handed-down stories told, the family spent 2 hard years in Arkansas. My great-uncle Claude said they moved so much that the chickens would lie down across their legs to be tied for the move. He also said that they moved twice in one day and they had to wait for the stove to cool down. By 1913, we're talking 10 years after they left West Tennessee, the Fisher family had gone from Tennessee. They found life in East Texas, settled in Indian Territory, witnessed Oklahoma become a state, moved to Western Arkansas for 2 years, and my great-uncles told me that those were the hardest 2 years they ever saw in their life. And they found a way to leave Arkansas and head back to Western Tennessee. And along the way, the family grew from 3 to 6, or was it 7? 7? I think I got it back. You see, Thomas Monroe still had family in an old home place in Carroll County. Thomas's father, William Porter, was still alive back in Carroll County. They went there, rented a wagon, a driver, loaded up a few things, and traveled 40 miles, most of them walking behind the wagon, from Carroll County to Bemis in December of 1913. I might add that the trip started before 4 a.m. and ended long after dark the same day. My great uncle said they stopped one time for something to eat. A year later, here it is, the 7th child, Catherine, was born here in Bemis. I was told by my great uncle Connie, he remembered in December of 1913, as he and his brother walked behind the wagon, as they came down South Royal Street, he said people looked at them like they were a bunch of country bumpkins. But he said, we were no country bumpkins. He said, we've been on a train, we've been to Texas, we've been to... He had a long list. He also said, and I find this interesting, and I can't help but think about this every time I go through this intersection. He said when they reached Royal and South Highland, which at that time would have been called Chester Levee Road, because as you know, Chester Levee was the levee. So he said when they reached Royal and Chester Levee, he said it was the nicest 2 miles of blacktop, hard surface road he had ever seen in his life. He said it was the only blacktop road he had ever seen. Now, can you imagine going into Bemis in 1913 and it's got a paved road unlike anywhere he had ever traveled? This place was uptown. Initially, the Fishers moved to Bemis to help a man farm that lived down here on the Forked Deer River bottom. David can point out they had a house down behind the Catfish Cabin. They didn't move here to go to work for the mill. He was a sharecropper when he did. Working with people, cropping, doing crops. With a few months, the older Fisher boys, my grandfather, his younger brother Claude, his younger brother Connie, all got work at the Bemis Mill. My great-grandfather, Thomas, also got work as a blacksmith for the mill. They moved into town below the mill on Kentucky Street. I have to brag and say that my grandfather Benton was only 16 when he started working for the mill. But he was a very skilled man. Over the next few years, he became one of the, shall I say, master mechanics of keeping the mill running. My grandmother, Acenah, called him a fixer. It's only a southern word, isn't it? He was not formally educated, but he loved to read, and read much he did. By late 1919, my grandfather, William Benton, was engaged to be married with my soon-to-be grandmother, Acenah Mills. He had a marriage license, but there was one slight problem arose. He left town. Back to my story. Many people desired to work for the company. The area was known for hard workers, and not all who applied were hired. Many moved on. Many people moved to Bemis in search of their future. Those that remained found both. A young woman named Acenah Mills met a young man named Benton Fisher. They both worked long hours for the company, but found time to enjoy each other. Their relationship developed, and their hearts grew closer. With an abrupt decision, Benton decided to leave Bemis and search for his future with his brothers in Texas. With his exit, he also left Acenah. Benton traveled many miles on his journey. Back in Bemis, several months passed. Acenah grew weary of Benton's return. She sent word to Benton that if he didn't return, she would wait for him no more. With no jobs available at the mill, Benton convinced the foreman into giving him Acenah's job. They were married, and over the next 4 years raised 13 children. Today again, this was written in 1996. Today it's been almost 2 decades, so let's just say 4 decades. Since the Bemis Company was closed, Acenah has survived Benton more than a quarter of a century. Their descendants are nearing 100 and are scattered coast to coast. Their children have continued to read and write in Bemis every 4th of July since the death of their father. She witnessed the journey of her children's children and even her children's children's children. She's held her great-great-granddaughter. Acenah knew her future, and she went after it. It's a quiet place again. The land is flat and the cotton grows tall on the long hot summers. A small creek trickles northward, but we all know where it goes. Obviously, I didn't know either of my great-grandfathers. Nobody I know today knew him. George Wesley Mills died a resident of Bemis in 1916 at 65 years old. I didn't know my great-grandmother, Alice Mills. Alice outlived George by 22 years and died at 77. Alice died in Bemis on Rain Springs Road at her son's Uncle PD's in 1937. Thomas Fisher Monroe died in 1935 at 69 years old in Sand Springs, Oklahoma. He's buried in Davis, Oklahoma. He always thought the family would go back to Davis, but they never did. Frances, my great-grandmother, outlived Thomas 45 years. I have to add that my great-grandmother was born in 1878 and she died in 1980. I was 18 when she passed. I knew this incredible woman. I attended her birthday party. She died in Sand Springs, Oklahoma at 102, outliving 3 of her children. As someone understood, previous generations of my family got knocked down. I'm so thankful that they got up. Someone said, man, don't lose when he gets knocked down, but when he won't get up. And close it. Now, this is just something to think about. This is in my head. The story's over, but this is me thinking out loud. I spoke earlier about the glue of the family. And we've talked about real hardships on family members. Members, many here, nobody in this room has ever met. Hardships that created this wonderful Fisher family of 15 Young Street in Bemis. We've reflected on these hardships, and the question it puts in all of our minds about our own existence in this world. How did we get here? You see, my mother, Joanna Pearl, was married to another man from this area before she married my father, George. His name was Jerry Cooper. His brother's here tonight, Uncle Gabe. His parents were Elmer and Ina Cooper. Jerry was a popular, handsome young man. And my mother, well, she was a hammer. I asked my mother-in-law one time if she ever thought of her mother as a beautiful woman, and she said, never really did. I said, my mother was beautiful. Anyway, Jerry joined the military, and he and my mother moved far away from Bemis. They were stationed in England. They had 2 children. My sister Lisa, my brother Jeff. But you see, tragedy struck this young family too. Jerry was in a terrible auto accident on New Year's Eve in Berkshire, England. And he died the day after on January 1st, 1959. Is that correct, everybody? Life is so hard. My mother moved back to Bemis. Her parents were living on the end of, guess where? Young Street. She moved in a small apartment halfway down the road between her mother's and my grandparents. My father had already moved out, but he would visit his parents, and on occasion, Lisa and Jeff would wander off, and my dad would bring them back up the street. Funny how things work out like that. They married in December of 1960, and I was born about 2 years later, January of 1962. My dad died in March of 2005. My mother outlived George by almost 12 years. Ironically, Jolena, listen to me here, Jolena died 58 years to the day on January 1st of 2017, exactly 58 years to the day after Jerry. People can believe whatever they want. You know, we got a bunch of bozos out there right now. They can believe we're all here by chance, like a roulette wheel. They can all believe that we're here from cosmic mud. They can all believe that we're evolved from apes. But I believe, what I truly believe, is we all serve an eternal, immutable, incomparable, unequal, all God. And that gives me great comfort in this crazy world we live in. I believe we can't understand this journey unless we examine the bond of a family name. Solomon in Ecclesiastes says, a good name is better than fine perfume, and the day of death is better than the day of birth. It's better to go to a house of mourning than to go to the house of feasting, for death is the destiny of everyone, and the living should take this to heart. I want to appreciate you taking the time to listen to me. Thank you for coming. Does anybody have any questions? Yes, ma'am.
I was told after Acenah died that Bill Jones had done research on the family and that he found she was actually 3 years older than what.
I've seen this document. I've seen it. It was the 1900 census, and there's a line item there for Acenah in 1900 that shows she was 2 years and several months old. Now, what's interesting is if you go look at the 1910, it's back on track again. So I've got to wonder, were they 2 years behind in the 1900 census? Did somebody, I don't know. There's some questions there of whether she was really 102 when she died or whether she was 100. She didn't know. Yes?
How all the Fishers and the Royals distinguish each other stand up?
Can we get the Fishers to stand up? That's related. Hey, look at this crowd. All right. Thank you. Okay, here is Cooper. That would have been my mother's brother-in-law back in the late 50s. Appreciate you being here, Uncle Gavin. Hey, Betty. So Trish, I know you have something to add.
Bill Jones did write a book. It's quite a lot. And then the rest of it, Ralph has been the one to pick it up and continue from there. And I'm blessed to own a copy of it. He gave me an interesting story about Cordelia and Alice. The families were intertwined, the Mars and the Fergusons and the Millses, so it's not incestuous relationships, but some of us find out as we trace our family tree that we're related to our spouses. And there's a lot of cousins marrying cousins back then, and I particularly found that to be true in Madison and Henderson and Carroll, in the districts that surround Jackson, because they didn't have the modern transportation, and you went to church together, you went to school together, you went to the neighborhood socials together, and so you ended up marrying your cousins frequently, and that has happened a lot in our mutual families. I remember, in the Mills family, George Washington Mills, and which is all of our mutual great-great-great-grandfather, his father was on Patrick Henry's staff and then after the Revolution. So we all have a lot of patriot ancestors, but
My only regrets is I didn't
right.
ask grandmother more about her
George
side of the family.
Washington's wife was Lucy Ann Ferguson. And her father, they were the Williams. They were in Danville on the Dan River, and her father owned a large plantation there. And this is, to me, an interesting story. A cousin in Virginia has done a lot of research of the family along the Dan River. And his book is available. He didn't publish it, but I downloaded it and had it printed over in Pico. But at any rate, our mutual ancestors, Lucy Ann Ferguson's grandfather was David Terry Williams, and he had this plantation, and he was supervising. It's a horrible story, but it's true. The tobacco was being smoked, and one of the slaves came up behind him and hit him in the back of the head with a log, and he fell off his horse dead. And the other slaves grabbed him and threw him into the fire, and he died. It's just, it's all a part of our history, and some parts of it aren't too pleasant. And that's one of them, is in the book of his cousin, Virginia Road.
You talking about how they intermingled with cousins and so forth. In our family, a lot of the men married a woman, and then when she died, he married a sister. So I've got children from both aunts, and that gets confusing
Brothers
too.
and sisters marry brothers and sisters.
Well, no, they didn't do that, but my great-grandfather, his first wife, when she died, he married her younger sister.
Exactly, that
Second,
happens.
yeah.
Jamie can tell you, she's in family history, Kathy too, and this is what happened with Alice. She came to help George Wesley take care of the children and married,
Yep.
right, her sister's husband.
Yeah.
And Charlie Mills that lived, Charlie was in the Spanish-American War, and he was the tallest person in the United States Army in the Spanish-American War. And I have a picture of him. After he came home, he was unpacking his gear and got his gun out of his duffel bag, and it went off and killed him. His sister, Emma lived, she married a porter in Carroll County, and they have several descendants. I just was blessed to grow up with my grandparents, and I've got lots of pictures of all of these people. I put it all online.
I just remember hearing my father, who was born here in 1925, about the Fisher family. And there's always some jokes about they didn't have to worry about a basketball team, just call the Fisher family.
Exactly, because they were all tall.
I have a question. Out of the 13 children, how many were male?
What's your question?
Out of the 13 Fisher people, how many were male and how many were female?
13, four girls and 9 boys. I got a picture here. I'm gonna share a couple of pictures with you right quick.
I really thought this would be more distracting while I'm talking, but this would have been Thomas and Mary Minerva. She was the one that never married for a year, and she died during childbirth. So that would have been Thomas Monroe's first wife. And this would have been the Roarks. This would have been my great-grandmother's family.
You got a nice pointer?
No, I see, I got this right here. So this is my great-grandmother who was born in 1878. This was about 1895. This would have been my great-grandfather, and this would have been Tildy. So this was probably about 3 or 4 years before they got married. I find that just a fascinating picture. Everybody looks dressed so well. It's an amazing picture. The part I like is the dog over here. I mean, I'm an old person. I mean, hey, these people love their dog, don't they? This would have been Thomas Monroe Fisher, Tildy, his first child, my great-grandmother, Frances Roark, and this would have been my grandfather right here. So this would have been 1898. Somebody was not very skilled with camera, were they? Those new iPhones, you know, they're just. So this is one of the most prized possessions of the family. This would have been about 1906 in Indian Territory. So this is my great-grandfather, Thomas. This would be my grandfather, Benton, who ran the projector right up here. His mother, Frances Roark Fisher, and her children, this would have been Claude, Connie. I don't know if this is a girl or a boy. I think this might have been the year that Aunt Bee was born, but this is Aunt Lula, I believe. It might have been her, I'm not sure. There's somebody in the grid that can tell us all these things, but I think to know that I have a picture of my family in Indian Territory in 1905 5, or, I mean, who has this? This would have been like down on Kentucky Street. This would have been Thomas Monroe. This is a terrible picture, but I still like to look at it. Let's see. Anyway, my grandfather's standing right here, the tall one. He's probably 15 or 16. He went to work at the mill at 16. My grandmother's sitting here in the chair. But I think all these were mostly kids down on Kentucky Street. But this is also a prized possession of our family. This would have been in 1919, the last picture that was made in Bemis before the family left Bemis and before Benton left Acenah. But this would have been my great-grandfather Thomas, Francis, my grandfather Benton. This would have been Claude. He was the great comedic. Uncle Connie was the original family storyteller. Bert died at like 24 years old in 15 Young Street. He got cancer and died right here in Bemis. He came back from Oklahoma because he wanted to spend time with his brother. This would have been Kathleen, who was born in Bemis, and Aunt Bee, who was born in Indian Territory. This would have been, who was that? Chester. Chester was born in Texas in Oklahoma after it became a state. So, what a family portrait, huh? Now this is another prized possession. This would be here in Bemis. This is one of the only known pictures of my grandfather Benton with Acenah. They look in love there. Before the 13 kids came along. We've all kind of wondered, figured out, got the calculator out, said, how many years was she pregnant? We don't even know if she knew how kids came about. No, we know that. So this would have been after they left. This is Thomas and Francis. I think this is out in Texas, but it says 22 or 23, so they had left Bemis and gone back to Texas. They look like they're enjoying life in 1923. Now this is a great picture. This is my grandfather, Benton. If you can see this, let's see if I can zoom in. Let's see the zoom. If you can see his hands, how dirty his hands are. I work for a living with my hands. I've had days like that. So. But I find that just an amazing picture that, this man just kind of self-taught, and he's over here running the mill. I think it is. I think it's a generator plant, power plant, probably.
She wants to know how many of the 13 is still alive.
There's 6 alive. I've got a picture here of the family. Okay, so this would have been 1948. My grandmother, Acenah, been here on the end, bookends. I can point out all of the names, but this is my dad up front here. David, are you this one here, David? Are you still here? Yes. And then Kenny over there, that's Kenny. He's the youngest right here. This picture is an amazing picture. It was found in a file. I think Richard found this going through some files from the company store, or the mill. So this was a company picture. And Kenny, who was just born, you can see, was born in 1942, Uncle Kenny?
Ricketts. You did? Ricketts.
This is right here is David who's speaking. But this is in the house at 15 Young Street. So the company came up there and set them up and took their picture. I don't know if we ever found out what this was for. I don't know.
It was in the Bemis story.
Bemis story. It didn't come out in the book though. A magazine, okay. But
Would they feature everybody or just feature?
Just them, probably.
Probably.
Because the size of them.
I am going to name names when I get to where they're a little bit more grown here. So here's back in the, about what year is this, Kenny? You're probably 8 or 9, so this is probably 1950, 51?
That's Kenny.
Oh, that's Kenny.
What year is this, Kenny?
51. So, This would have been Benton Jr., who's got his military uniform on. Richard, this is Richard, who, everybody knows Richard. Paul, Beverly's wife, Beverly's still here. Uncle Thomas, my dad George, Ronald, the Naval Academy graduate. I think it was 28 out of 900 who graduated. David, 29?
John McCain graduated.
Yeah.
John McCain out of school.
Bobby, he's still alive up in Kentucky. There's Kenny, Aunt Louise. This is Aunt Nell, Bill Jones' wife. This would be Betty Short. And my Aunt Alice, she still lives up in Jackson, Missouri. And David, is that you making that face? So this is an interesting picture. This is great-grandmother of Acenah and Thomas Monroe. Now, he died, I think it was in 1935 or 37, so this was probably right before he died, I would think.
You said Acenah.
Oh, I'm sorry, Francis Roark. I'm getting ahead of here. So there's another picture of Thomas Monroe. Man, I wish I could grow a mustache like that. It's a nice one in the day. What? Yeah, he kind of does like that Mark Twain, doesn't he? So let's zoom in on that. Get a good look. Look at that. He looks like a lawyer, doesn't he? Kind of round glasses. So this is I didn't know what year this was. Dave, what about what year would this be? Early 60s? 59. So this again would be Nell Jones, Alice Isaac, my grandmother Acenah Mills Fisher, Benton Fisher. Wait a minute, is this Alice over here? That's Betty there. It's kind of blurred. Yeah, that's Betty and Alice, then Louise. This would be, and this is in order here. So Benton Jr., Thomas, Bobby, my dad, Ronald, Paul, Richard. Can you look at that height on Richard? Look at that. David and Kenny. Kenny. You know, and this is another, everybody always joked and said that Uncle Paul was Grover's favorite. Did we ever find out that was true? Uncle Paul.
My kids love Paul. He torn the life out of them and they playing in the yard.
Is Beverly, you know that's true, don't you? It's true. That's her daughter. That's Paul.